want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. First of all, what do you make of the testimony of Donald Williams? I want to play some of that right now. Watch this.
So when I first arrived on the scene, Mr. Floyd was vocalizing his sorriness and his pain and his distress that he was going through. The more that the knee was blockaded on his neck and shimmies were going on, the more you seen Floyd fade away and slowly fade away, and like the fish in a bag, you seen his eyes slowly, pale out and again slowly roll to the back of his eyes. And he, so this is what I seen, this is what I heard, and that's how, what it was. Like, he was going through distress because of the knee, and he vocalized it that I can't breathe, I need to get up, and I'm sorry. And his eyes slowly rolled to the back of his head. You seen the blood coming out of his nose. You heard him tell him before he stopped speaking that my stomach hurts. And those, most of the time, is the last vowel movement of your life. So from there on, he was lifeless. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't have no life in him, no more on his body movements.
During that time period, did you notice anything about his breathing that was significant to you?
Yes, just like in MMA, you could tell when someone gets tired, or you could tell when someone's getting choked out or things like that. His breathing was getting tremendously heavy and tremendously harder for him to breathe, and you actually could hear him. You could see him struggling to actually gasp for air while he was trying to breathe, and he barely could move while he was trying to get air.
As you were standing there, did others gather around?
Correct. At the moment, I was the most vocalist person out there pleading for Floyd's life because I felt like it was definitely in the wrong. And there was, at one point in time, a medic came on scene, and she spoke on checking pulse, what made me even go even more harder because I heard it, and then I registered it, and like, oh, you do need to check his pulse. Oh, he is not moving. Like, oh, you just killed this man, And so her expertise was like, look, he's fading away. You need to check.
Folks, that was Donald Williams, of course, a professional mixed martial arts fighter who was heard on the video yelling at the cops there. Strong testimony there, Bernarda.
Absolutely. Donald Williams gave one of the strongest testimony that I've seen in the 16 years that I was a prosecutor. Donald Williams comes off as credible and likable, that you can trust him. You can trust him. You believe what he is saying. And with that, think about the most important word that we heard from there is that, number one, he was like a fish out of a bag of water. In addition to that, Derek Chauvin was shimmying on the neck of George Floyd. Shimmying is going to be a word that's going to be used repeatedly during closing arguments. And I think that is one that the jury's going to be able to accept.
So the next phase here, obviously, if you're the defense, they want to make this all about drug use. They want the jury to believe that George Floyd died because of drugs in his system. That's what their whole plan is.
Absolutely, Roland, because what happens is that in any homicide case, you have to prove manner and cause of death. Manner of death has to be homicide. And then the cause of death has to be as a result of the actions of the defendant. If you do not prove manner of death being homicide, if you do not prove that Derek Chauvin was the one who actually caused the death of George Floyd, then you cannot find him guilty of any of the three charges. So that is the focus that Eric Nelson is going to have to take if he has any chance in trying to get Derek Chauvin acquitted. But in the end, like was emphasized by the prosecutor, George Floyd was on drugs for years, and he was walking around And without any issue did he die during that time. It wasn't until May 25th when Derek Chauvin put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds is that he actually died.
Bernardo Villanova, we certainly appreciate it, Senior Trial Counsel for the Joey Jackson Law Firm. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me, Roland.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Opening arguments and testimony began today in the trial of former Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin, the man, of course, on trial for killing George Floyd. Prosecutors said during opening statements that Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's head and neck for 4 minutes and 45 seconds as Floyd cried out for help, stayed on his neck as Floyd failed and had seizures for 53 seconds, and then remained on a non-responsive Floyd for another 3 minutes and 51 seconds. This is an update to the 8 minutes and 46 seconds initially quoted. The defense team focused on Floyd's alleged drug use and his resistance to the arresting officers. Here is what took place today.
We plan to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Chauvin was anything other than innocent on May 25th of 2020. And our second objective, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring you the evidence. And you will be able to hear Mr. Floyd saying, "Please, I can't breathe. Please, man, please." In this 9 minutes and 29 seconds, you will see that as Mr. Floyd is handcuffed there on the ground, he is verbalizing 27 times, you will hear. In the 4 minutes and 45 seconds, "I can't breathe. Please, I can't breathe." You will see that Mr. Chauvin is kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck and back. He has one knee on his neck, and the knee on his back is intermittently off and on his back, as you will be able to see for yourself in the video footage. You will hear Mr. Floyd as he's crying out. You hear him at some point cry out for his mother when he's being squeezed there. He's very close to his mother, you will learn. You will hear him say, "Tell my kids I love them." You will hear him say about his fear of dying, he says, "I'll probably die this way. I'm through. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me, man." You will hear him crying out, and you will hear him cry out in pain.
Mr. Chauvin asked the officers, "Is he under arrest?" Yes. And then Officer Chauvin began to assist them in their efforts to get him into the squad car. You will see that 3 Minneapolis police officers could not overcome the strength of Mr. Floyd. Mr. Chauvin stands 5'9", 140 pounds. Mr. Floyd is 6'3", weighs 223 pounds. As the struggle continues, you will see and hear both what Mr. Floyd was saying to the officers and the officers' responses to him. Mr. Floyd does end up on the street and appeared to continue to struggle to these officers, so much so that they considered applying what's called the maximal restraint technique. It used to be called the hobble or the hog tie. Mr. Chauvin used his knee to pin Mr. Floyd's left shoulder blade and back to the ground, and his right knee to pin Mr. Floyd's left arm to the ground. Officer King was placed below Mr. Floyd's buttocks, and Officer Lane was at the feet. And you will see and hear them continue to struggle with Mr. Floyd as he's attempting to kick. The evidence will show that Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his body, all of which acted to further compromise an already compromised heart. At the conclusion of this evidence, you will be instructed as to the law, the elements of the offense, and the court will give you detailed instructions on what you must find to convict Mr. Chauvin of these charges. But when you review the actual evidence, and when you hear the law and apply reason and common sense, there will only be one just verdict, and that is to find Mr. Chauvin not guilty.
Joining me now is Bernardo Villalona, Senior Trial Counsel for the Joey Jackson Law Firm in New York. Certainly glad to have you here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. First of all, your assessment of today's first day of this trial.
Thank you for having me, Roland. So today is the day that we've been waiting for so long. Since May 25th of 2020, we've been waiting for this trial to start. And we heard and got a preview of what this trial is going to entail by listening to the opening statements by the prosecution as well as from the defense. The prosecution, who did an opening about 1 hour long, did do a good job emphasizing that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, actually for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, that Derek Chauvin was on the neck of George Floyd. Emphasizing also that your eyes don't lie, that you can believe your eyes. And when you look into that, you can see the intent of Derek Chauvin in taking away the life, the breath of George Floyd. From the defense perspective, actually the defense also did a good job. And the defense did a good job because they did a good job with the facts that they were dealt. They focused on reasonable doubt. They focused on reminding the jury that this case is not just about a video. And the way that they did it in saying that over 50 law enforcement people were working on this case, over 50,000 pages were involved, bait stamped in this case. And taking that into account goes to show you that even with all those pages and also all those people helping out, that it was more than a video. It wasn't a quick judgment that on that day he was culpable. So taking that all into account, I think that both sides actually did have a good day in terms of laying out the opening statement. So now let's see where we're going to go with it.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. More witnesses took the stand today in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, including first of all, of course, he's the one charged with murdering George Floyd, folks. Riveting their testimony, including a 9-year-old who testified and 2 high school seniors. Here's what took place.
At some point, did you make a 911 call?
That is correct. I did call the police on the police.
Right. And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder.
All right. So if we can at this point, then play Exhibit 20.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Officer 987 killed a citizen in front of a Chicago store. He just pretty much just killed this guy that wasn't resisting arrest. He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time, Officer 987. The man went, stopped breathing. He wasn't resisting arrest or nothing. He was already in handcuffs. They pretty much just killed the dude. I don't even know if he's dead for sure, but he was not responsible when the ambulance just came and got him. And the officer that was just out here left, the one that actually just murdered the kid in front of everybody on 38th in Chicago.
Okay. Would you like to speak with the sergeant?
Yeah, like that was bogus what they just did to this man. He was unresponsive. He wasn't resisting arrest or any of it.
Okay, let me get you over to the desk. You can request to speak with the sergeant, okay?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here talking with another off-duty firefighter that just sat here and watched it in front of us as well.
Okay.
And she told him to check the man's pulse, but they wouldn't even check the pulse.
Okay, 1 second.
I have reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers, Kyle. You gonna kill yourself. I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot yourself. Murderers, bro. Y'all niggas is murderers, bro. Minneapolis Third Precinct.
Hey, it's dispatch.
Yeah, man. So I want to speak to a supervisor. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he wants to speak with a supervisor relating to 320's called cup food.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father. I have a black brother. I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
When you walked past the squad car there, did you see anything happening there on the ground as you were walking towards Cup Foods with your cousin?
Yes, I see a man on the ground and I see a cop kneeling down on him.
Was there anything about the scene that you didn't want your cousin to see?
Yes.
And what was that?
A man terrified, scared, begging for his life.
Is that why you directed your cousin to going into Cup Foods?
Yes.
And then when you saw what was happening there at the scene, what was it about the scene that caused you to come back?
It wasn't right. He was suffering. He was in pain.
Let me stop you there for just a second, Darnell. And so when you say, first of all, he, are you referring to the person you come to know as George Floyd?
Yes.
Did you know anything about Mr. George Floyd before May 25th?
No.
Had you ever met him before?
No.
Ever seen him before to your knowledge?
No.
So when you came back to this scene here that we can see in Exhibit 16, what did you do when you first got there and we see where you're standing? What did you do?
I pulled out my phone.
And what were you doing in pulling out your phone?
Recording and capturing what I was seeing.
So tell the jury what you observed, what you heard when you stopped to look at what was happening there at the scene.
I heard George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe." He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help.
Joining us right now is attorney Yodita Welday. Of course, she also is with America's Most Wanted. This was a unbelievable day of testimony, Yodita, all across the board. to hear these three minors testify, having to also relive that video describing what took place. But the mixed martial arts fighter, he was asked point blank, why'd you call the cops? And he said, because I felt I witnessed a murder.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the prosecution's starting really strong. They had a strong day yesterday. They're continuing to have a strong case by putting up these bystanders who in real time can show these jurors what they experience and what they continue to experience because of that traumatic day. But I will say with the Marshall Mix expert or fact witness, that is Mr. Williams, he didn't have a great cross-examination. You could see that he was really getting frustrated, combative, defensive. Makes me actually question whether the prosecutors actually warned these witnesses that that is something to expect. But what that tape did, that 911 call being played for the jury, he may not have been as effective today in his testimony, but that 911 call said everything he needed to say to those jurors that he couldn't say on that stand. So still very powerful.
This is, I mean, obviously it is very hard for folks who have to relive this, and also them playing the video of different angles for us to actually see that that Derek Chauvin was not the only officer putting his weight on the body of George Floyd. Yeah. Seeing these different angles and hearing people's, again, real-time narration really puts things into perspective for some of these jurors who actually said that they'd never actually seen the video in full. Some have never seen it at all. Some only saw parts of it. So this is definitely eye-opening for them. But if you remember the 911 dispatcher, she was able to walk the jurors through this video that no one had seen in the public. It was perched up. It was a police camera that was across the street from Cup Foods. And for her to say, I thought that the video had frozen. That's how long they were on George Floyd. That she had to do something that was completely out of the norm for a 911 dispatcher. And that was to call a supervisor and say something is going on. So for her, someone who's never had police training, any type of use of force training, to know that common sense and reason tells her something is off about this video, that's what the jurors can do. This is, of course, when you talk about, again, the way the prosecutors are approaching this, very methodical. And look, if you're a prosecutor, you want to lead with your strongest people. You don't want to sort of just, you know, meander into this. Look, they've had a strong 2 days, and you talk about putting the defense on the defense. That certainly has been the case. Yeah, I mean, the defense is always going to have an uphill battle, but certainly in this case, because of that video. So the prosecutors, like you said, start strong. And that's what was a little confusing when they started with the 911 dispatcher. You thought that they might have started with a family member or maybe one of those younger minor bystanders. But I see why they did it now. She had something powerful to say, and it's the start of a chain of events from that day. But they want to play that tape as much as possible, and they're getting to do that through the bystanders who were recording from different angles. So as many times as they could start that video and stop it frame by frame and have a witness testify to what they're watching, they are ingraining in these jurors' minds what this was like on that day for not only George Floyd, but for these bystanders too. So if I were the prosecutor, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry. But no, if I were the prosecutor, I was gonna say that is the goal. Keep playing that video from every single angle as much as possible. The defense has nothing to contradict that video. They can try and poke holes. That's what they're doing. That's their job, to muddy the waters. But there is no combating that video in real time to watch what it is that's happening to George Floyd. That, again, the defense said in their opening statements for the jurors to use their common sense and reasoning. When you look at that video, you don't need training to know that common sense and reasoning says that what was happening to George Floyd was absolutely unreasonable and excessive. But on that particular point, here's the other piece, because I go back to the Rodney King trial. The defense attacked the video because there was only one angle. Well, if you look at the video in terms of the positioning, not really on his neck. No. In this case, you've got multiple videos, multiple angles, and so you're the defense. You got to figure out, if you're going to try to discredit the video, you're not going to discredit all of them from different angles as opposed to what we've seen in previous trials. But even if they try to discredit the angles, you have the actual witnesses testifying to what it is in the video. So
what the prosecutors are doing, and they should be doing this, is putting on all these witnesses to also supplement what it is that they're watching. So you can't discount them, especially those younger kids. The ones that were minors at the time, the 17, the 18-year-olds, it's really hard for the defense to go on the attack and cross-examine them, right? These are people who are still suffering, who still think about that day. One of them said they can't even walk down that street anymore. It would look very bad on the part of the defense to try and attack them. It's their job, but not a good look in front of the jury.
All right, then. Your detail well day. We appreciate it. Thank you so very much. We'll keep, of course, we're streaming this trial every single day. Folks can watch it on our YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter accounts as well to keep up with what's going on. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Witness testimony and surveillance video was shown today in the Derek Chauvin murder trial in Minneapolis. Of course, it provided the first look at George Floyd's actions inside Cup Foods before his death. It was from inside the store. Shows Floyd casually walking into Cup Foods, roll it please, and talking with customers and employees. We also heard from the store clerk and others who witnessed the murder. Guys, y'all can roll the video. We're going to talk over it. Monique, I want to start with you. You've been following the trial. Just your assessment of what happened today.
The evidence was devastating. The witness testimony was certainly painful to listen to. I've been in trials of my own where I found myself praying for my witnesses, that we all would end up making it through, and that nobody would collapse on the stand, and that I would keep it together and do my job at the table. And I found myself doing that today, even though I'm not there, not in the trial. Even one of the tweets that I tweeted today was "Help him, Holy Ghost," because when we saw the prosecution's witnesses time after time be racked with guilt and then ultimately just collapse in tears watching the evidence be put before the jury, I can only imagine what the jury's reaction is to these things. But the other thing that I would say is that the prosecution is doing an almost seamless job on presentation of evidence and witnesses and strategy. They pulled the sting today. I'm sure Scott will explain after. I'm sorry, I have to cut out early today what that means. But when you know that there's bad evidence that's going to come at some point and you want to control that narrative and present that evidence yourself before anybody else gets a chance to, they started yesterday with what really matters, the relevant evidence about how George Floyd did not need to die. They backed up today, so they went in reverse chronology and explained what happened before he ended up on the ground outside. And then they ended, with the MPD technician coming and all of that body cam footage coming in. And all I was thinking in my head the whole time I was watching that footage is they ought to rot in hell. They ought to rot in hell. They ought to rot in hell. I mean, convictions really are not good enough for what we saw today.
Scott, your assessment.
Yeah, I agree with Monique. The sting they pulled out today, what Monique was talking about, was the store clerk that actually called the police. I actually didn't know there were that many counterfeit bills coming through that community. I mean, it's like this was the second one. But he said he thought that George Floyd was high, although he could have a conversation with him. And he called the police because he had this counterfeit bill. Turns out that George Floyd did have drugs in his system, but that's part of the defense. The prosecution put that witness on today to take the sting out of that, to add credibility to their case, to the jury, saying, this jury, I'm going to give you all the facts, not just some of the facts. I'm not going to hide anything from you. So when you hear this from the defense, you will have heard it already. But the emotional testimony, and it's early, is expected. But what you got today, the power of the testimony was reflected in how the video manifested emotionally with all of these people who observed this. Their helplessness, for one, but more importantly, that they watched the life force being taken away from this black man under the knee of the defendant and the police. And you don't have many videos like that. I've told you before, Roland, the power of this video and why you had protests all over the world was the slowly left, the life force left this man's body and you observed it. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't him running and getting shot in the back. No, this 9 minutes was just grueling and awful. And you heard a lot of that on the stand. It's an excellent start for the prosecution, but know the experts are coming and the cause of death is going to be hotly debated and litigated, and that's really going to be the turnkey or the most important part of this case. Who are the experts and who does the jury believe?
Robert.
Was it the drugs and fentanyl and hypertension that killed him, or is it but for the police, the drugs and the health issues don't really matter, because but for the police triggering those ramifications of his health issue, is that what killed him? But for the police. Look for that phraseology as we carry on this trial.
Robert?
You know, there's an odd thing that the defense is doing is a kind of divergent, bifurcated defense. One is this idea of the buck defense, where George Floyd was a 6'5", monstrous, towering individual, athlete, hopped up on drugs, a super soldier, flipping over cars, juggling buildings, all that. And so, of course, it took a small 5'9", very weak officer. We had to hold him down. We had to put our knee on his neck. There was no other way for us to contain him. The buck defense. I've been using it since slavery to talk about black men. But then they have a second defense, which is what Scott was just mentioning, which is kind of an eggshell defense, saying that George Floyd was so sick, so weak, so decrepit, so riddled with drugs that he would have died at that exact same place and at that exact same time with no intervention from the officers, that he was a person in such poor physical condition, such poor health, that there was nothing that the officer did that contributed to his death, that it was simply the forces of nature and the officer just happened to be there at that time. So they're arguing in two different directions at the same time. So what you saw the prosecution do today is, as Scott and Monique said, try to take the sting out of that second defense, the sting out of that idea of him simply being so weak and decrepit and riddled with drugs and alcohol that he was going to just keel over and die, taking all culpability away from the officer. I think the next thing they will have to do is attack that buck defense and the idea that he somehow posed a threat, because it's a nonsense argument. And the fact that in America you can have this on video, have a half dozen or more witnesses witness something, talk about this for a year, and still we're on pins and needles as to if there will be a conviction, shows you just how broken the criminal justice system is. God forbid you get killed by the police and you don't have a film crew there with you to chronicle what happened. God forbid you get killed by the police, you don't have an international movement that sparks protests in Sydney, Australia, and Shanghai, China, and everywhere else around the world, because if you're just a regular individual who gets killed by the police, if these officers can't get convicted for this, I'm not sure what you would have to do to get convicted for killing a black man in America.
Folks, we're going to play some of the testimony that took place today in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Here it is.
I'm going to pause here for a moment. The record should reflect 8:29:55. We saw you standing there with your hands on your head for a while, correct? Correct. What was going through your mind during that time period?
Disbelief and guilt.
Okay. Why guilt?
If I would have just not taken the bill, This could have been avoided.
We also saw another individual get pushed by an officer, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do after that happened?
I was just trying to calm him down, tell him to stand back.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of Exhibit 33. You were going back into the store.
Correct.
And so then did you just continue to work your shift?
Correct.
And so did you continue to work at Cup Foods as long as you could?
No.
Why not?
I didn't feel safe.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I'm not trying to win. I'll get on the ground, anything. I get in the car. Man. He know it. He know it to Mr. Officer. Y'all hear me? Don't do me like that, man.
In the car.
Okay, can I talk to you, please?
Yes, you get in this car. We can talk.
I am claustrophobic.
I'm hearing you, but you're not working with me.
God, I'm claustrophobic.
Get in the car. Get in the car.
Put me in the front. Please.
No, you're not getting in the front.
I'm claustrophobic, Mr. Officer.
Get in the car.
Okay, man, okay? I'm not a bad guy, man.
Get in the car.
I'm not a bad guy. Man. What's my number? Please, officer. Please.
Sit.
Please.
Take a seat.
Please, man. Please. No,
take a seat.
I can't choke. I can't breathe, officer. Please. Please.
Fine.
My wrist. My wrist, man. My wrist, man, please. I can't. And I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground, yo. I'm on the ground. I'm going down. I'm going down. I'm going down.
Get in the squad.
I'm going down. I'm going down. I'm not going to lose, man.
Bro, you gonna die a heart attack, too, right? Get in the car.
I know I can't breathe.
Get in the car.
Oxygen. I can't go, man. I can't breathe.
Take a seat.
Please, man. Please listen to me.
Is he going to jail? He's under arrest right now for forgery.
I'll tell you.
Can we figure out what's going on?
For what?
Take him out.
For what? Look at you. Thank you. Thank you.
Get him down on the ground. Yeah, on the ground. On the ground.
My
Right. You got your restraint. Hobbled.
Can't breathe.
Okay.
Can't breathe.
Grab that. You can get him. Jesus Christ.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Thank you.
I can't breathe.
Stop moving.
Mama.
Yeah,
Mama.
it's in the,
Mama.
one of the front pouches.
Mama.
On my right side bag.
Mama.
You're the arrest guy.
All right. Oh my God.
It's now you go to jail.
I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this, man.
Can we stop it right here, please?
Mama, look.
Mr. McMahon, do you need a minute?
When you're ready.
We'll just give you a moment, Mr. McMahon. I'm not sure if there's water as well. Oh, if you need a break to get some water, let me know, and we can take a break. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you.
You okay? I know that this is difficult. Can you just explain sort of what you're feeling in this moment?
I feel helpless. I don't have a mama either, and I understand him. My mom died June 25th.
Scott, how does that testimony play to a jury?
Well, it's very emotional testimony for one thing. They took a break right after that. Okay, so the jury is going to be just as emotional as he is. He lost his mother. George Floyd didn't have a mother. And this witness and the other witnesses keep talking about how helpless they felt. And it's true. When the police are there and they got the guy down and you had a paramedic there, they couldn't help but they could see the life force leaving his body. And so his testimony is very powerful. But this case has a lot of different aspects to it. It's going to take like up to 30 days. So this is just one. The prosecutors have to keep that emotional level there for the next 20 or 30 days. We'll see. The real issue, though, with this witness is, could he finish and tell his story? The video tells part of it. What the video also shows with the police and this gentleman here is they just know discretion. They didn't care, and they didn't know how to deal with someone in mental or drug crisis, which is the biggest problem with the police force. There's just nothing there other than arrest and take them. They should have put him in the car and, despite his protest, just took him to the hospital, but they didn't care about it. So good testimony for the prosecution, but he told his story. But can that level of emotional connection with the jury, can they maintain it on a daily basis or weekly basis or through the end of the trial? They're going to try, no matter what, to do just that.
Robert?
Well, you know, it looks good for the prosecution currently, but I've learned not to judge cases at halftime, particularly in the first
exactly.
quarter.
No. We're not saying guilt or innocence. I'm just simply saying, what is it looking like from your perspective? How does that play to a jury right now? Not whether he's going to be guilty.
It plays well to a jury right now, but also there are portions of that I can see the defense will be using in their direct presentment of the facts. They will argue that they tried to peacefully put Mr. Floyd in the backseat of the car, that he resisted, that he pushed back, that they were simply trying to restrain him at the time, that they called for paramedics, that they followed the protocols as were taught to them as required by the department, and that despite the death being tragic, there was no criminality involved. If anything, there was recklessness involved. I think that's what will be their argument. And one of the issues that the prosecution is going to have to establish is the prong of intent, because people keep asking for a first-degree murder charge or conviction in this case. Well, the prosecution has to prove that there was an intent on the part of Officer Chauvin to kill Mr. Floyd, and they haven't presented evidence that would indicate that. And the defense is going to argue that this was just all a horrible accident because of Mr. Floyd's drug addiction, because of Mr. Floyd's alcohol consumption, because of Mr. Floyd's physical condition, and that it's not their fault because he resisted. That's going to be their defense. So I'm going to be looking for the prosecution pushing forward and pushing evidence that will show what the intent was and how they can establish that in this case. So those are things that I'm looking out for.
All right, folks. Let's.
Yeah, you know, Roland, if I may, real quick, one other thing. The police are going to always argue one way, shape, or form. I didn't go there to kill George Floyd. I went there to arrest him. He died as a result of him stealing and resisting, but I didn't kill him. In the end, that's kind of going to be what the defense is going to be in a big way. And with the expert, they're going to argue that in closing. It's going to be a tough case to get a conviction here.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. You have the 5th day of the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, and wrapped up the first week of testimony, this time from Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, the head of the Minneapolis Police Department's homicide unit. He condemned Chauvin's actions, saying they were uncalled for. Here's some of what he said today in court.
I received a phone call from Sergeant Kluger, who was the mid-watch sergeant.
Do you recall what Sergeant Kluger, let me back up. Did Sergeant Kluger give you information that you relied upon to take further steps in your duties that night?
Yes.
Okay. What did Sergeant Kluger tell you?
Sergeant Kluger informed me that he was at the hospital at that time, and he was with a male that he described may or may not live. Later on in the night, I found out that that male was Mr. Floyd. He said he was down there at the hospital. He asked me if I would be willing to respond to the incident location of 38th in Chicago because he was tied up at the hospital at the time. He asked me if I would respond down there just to make sure, just in case we had to secure that area and make contact with any of his officers that were there on scene still, because this was had the potential to be a possible critical incident.
Can you describe then what you mean by critical incident?
Usually an incident, an officer-involved incident where either the officer or somebody else has died, or an officer or somebody else has suffered great bodily harm that later led to death.
And based on your knowledge of Minneapolis Police Department policy, what is supposed to happen if there is a critical incident with the crime scene and with the participants?
A crime scene is supposed to be secured, which means locked down, and that is for the purpose to preserve any evidence that is there. The involved parties or the involved officers usually are chilling and awaiting escort sergeants so that they can be escorted to an interview room downtown. Appropriate notifications are made.
In all the years you've been working for the Minneapolis Police Department, been trained to kneel on the neck of someone who is handcuffed behind their back in a prone position?
No, I haven't.
Is that, if that were done, would that be considered force?
Absolutely.
What level of force might that be?
That would be the top tier, the deadly force.
Why?
Because of the fact that if your knee is on a person's neck, that can kill them.
Did you watch that video in its entirety?
Yes, I did.
And since then, have you had an opportunity to watch other video of the incident?
Yes.
And specifically, have you watched body-worn camera video of the incident from the involved officers?
Yes.
And based on that and your years of training and experience with the Minneapolis Police Department, you saw then Officer Chauvin with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, correct?
Yes.
Would you call what you saw there a use of force?
Yes.
And did that use of force continue until the ambulance arrived?
Yes, it did.
Was there any change in the level of force being used until the ambulance arrived?
No.
And what do you think about that use of force during that time period?
I'm sorry?
What do you think about that use of force during that time period?
A little vague. Could you limit it to the time frame?
Right. Okay. So, based on your review of the body-worn camera videos of the incident,
Yes.
and directing your attention to that moment when Mr. Floyd is placed on the ground,
Yes.
what is your, your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger, if that's what they felt. And that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force.
So, in your opinion, should that restraint have stopped once he was handcuffed and prone on the ground?
Absolutely.
And I should add to that question then also that it appeared he had stopped resisting.
I'm sorry?
And it appeared that he had stopped putting up any resistance.
Absolutely, I would stop.
I have nothing further, Gar.
All right, folks, let's hear from attorneys Natalie Jackson and Monique Presley, who joins us. And, of course, we still have our panel. I'll start with you, Monique. Your assessment of today's testimony in Day 5 of the Derek Chauvin murder trial.
It was critical testimony because we are now getting to the point in the trial where they zone in on the law, on use of force, and how all use of force guidelines and protocols were violated. So it's going to be important that as we move on, that we hear from people who are on the force who know that in the same or similar situation, they would not have acted in that manner.
Natalie?
I 100% agree with Monique. This is the testimony that will prove up the murder 2 charge. In murder 2, they have to prove that not only did Derek Chauvin kill George Floyd, which is a causation issue, they also have to prove that he committed an assault and battery on George Floyd. That's what excessive force is. It means that you are using force that is illegal. Officers are allowed to use force to stop arrest. However, they can't use excessive force. So this lieutenant's testimony was critical in showing that Derek Chauvin used excessive force and thus committed a crime of assault and battery on George Floyd.
Monique, how critical is it to have a homicide detective, not somebody who's a former cop testifying for the prosecution, but an active duty police officer saying those words in front of a jury?
It's the closest we've gotten yet, as I said, to bearing down on the question that's before the jury. I agree with what Natalie said. And as I said yesterday, sure, there are lots of things that are happening that are emotional testimony that pull on the emotions, the feelings, the anger, the rage, the hurt of jurors. But at the end of the day, they're going to be instructed not to follow their emotions, but to lean on and hear the instructions of law, to apply the law, to evaluate the witnesses, and to make a determination of whether this officer utilized appropriate, necessary force. And we know for sure that he did not. There was one other thing that was important, though, when Sergeant Edwards was talking at the beginning of the day, giving testimony, and said that when he got on the scene, he followed protocol in asking the 2 involved officers to turn on their body cams. Now, what prosecution wasn't saying at that point, but I know they will say, is that those body cams never should have been off. If they were interacting with witnesses after Mr. Floyd's body, because Mr. Floyd was gone, after his body was loaded into the ambulance and taken to another location, if they spoke with witnesses, if they talked to each other while they were waiting in the cruiser, they should have had those cameras on because they had been involved in what could have been and actually was a crime scene. So the fact that he showed up followed protocol, told him to put and have a seat, meant that he fully had sized up what was going on that scene. And then obviously others came and took over for him. But that's missing evidence. That's destruction of potential evidence in time where we have no idea what those officers were doing or what they were saying until ultimately they were examined much later on and they were taken to another location.
But that also is powerful, Natalie, because again, by having these cops testify to that, it shows the kind of reckless behavior of the officers on the scene, and that
caused the death of George Floyd, whether or not that knee on his neck caused his death, and whether or not that death was a battery, which is murder 2, or whether or not he did it with a depraved heart, which is murder 3, or whether or not it was reckless indifference, which is manslaughter.
Candace Kelly, I want to bring you in your assessment of today's testimony.
Well, listen, this is really unprecedented. You don't often have cops taking the stand and talking poorly against other cops. We even heard from his supervisor talking about him being a subordinate and leaving out parts of the story, that part being that he left his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So I think that this is huge. I think that this is something that jurors will look at and say, this isn't something that we see before. These people are turning on him, so to speak, and taking the stand. And then we also heard testimony that Derek Chauvin takes a continuing education class every year. And in this class, as we heard this homicide detective talk about today, they learn about this specific technique and not to do it, and the unreasonable force and what happens when it's used, that it causes death, and which is what he said on the stand right there. So, we see him vociferously taking notes, Derek Chauvin. I'm not sure why he was taking notes during that time, because he's been to that class every year and knew better, but he didn't do better. As the opening statement, the prosecution, and they said, he didn't let up, he didn't get up. He didn't let up, he didn't get up. And the prosecution has had an amazing week in proving that up till today when they let out midday.
Xavier?
Really great testimony that was there by Zimmerman, stating that once the threat level went down, then there should be some action being taken to make sure that the person is secure. Well, that didn't happen here. And it's pretty compelling to have police officers basically saying, hey, this is completely different than what's normally required on the scene to be able to secure an arrestee. So it's huge to show that they're excluding the activities of Derek Chauvin directly from what is acceptable. And you saw John Edwards, he was on the stand and he seemed visibly shaken by what was going on, even though he did a good job of walking through his testimony. So a lot of the witnesses we've seen on the stand have been emotionally shaken. And I think that has a big impact on the jury.
Monique, final comments from you and Natalie. Would you say that for the prosecution, this was a very strong opening week?
Absolutely. They did their job this week, but this is, in my estimation, the easier part of the job, in that they control their witnesses. They have well prepped their witnesses. They have a strategy in place. They're executing that strategy. There weren't really any surprises. When we start the remainder of the case, and I don't know how much longer they'll be putting on their case. They say we're going to be going until the end of April, but at whatever point it turns over to the defense, that's going to get much more difficult, because the defense is going to try to switch defendants on us and make George Floyd the defendant. So the prosecution will have to be ready for that game plan. And the only other thing that I would say is, it's important for people to understand that we don't have to prove intent here. It doesn't matter whether Chauvin intended to kill George Floyd or not, whether it's second degree, third degree, or second degree manslaughter. It is only important to show that it was a contributing cause, that it was a superseding cause is not even necessary, but one of the causes. So when the defense is saying it was drugs, it could have been. When the defense is saying it was his heart, it could have been. But would it have happened but for the knee on the neck and all of the injury and restriction of blood flow and air that caused? So that's a much easier case to prove. And if everything is right in the world, the jury will reach the right decision.
Natalie?
I think that the prosecution had a great week. I think that they weaved in their theme throughout all the witnesses. In the opening statement, Jerry Blackwell promised that there will be a bouquet of humanity, and he put that on with the witnesses who were there trying to help George Floyd. He also said that in your care is in your custody is in your care. That was a part of his theme. Didn't get up, didn't let up, as one of the other panelists said, was a part of his theme. They are proving everything that they promised the jury in opening statement, and I think that they had a banner week this week.
Natalie Jackson, Monique Presley, we really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Gripping testimony today as the police chief of Minneapolis spoke, as well as the doctor, the emergency room doctor that treated George Floyd when he was taken in. Here is a roundup.
Did you receive any information or indication from the paramedics when they brought Mr. Floyd in that anyone had attempted CPR on Mr. Floyd at the scene on May 25th, 2020?
Overruled. I did not receive a report that Mr. Floyd had received bystander CPR, no.
Did you receive a report that he had received CPR from any of the officers who may have been on the scene on May 25th, 2020?
No.
Is the administration of CPR right away important for you to know when you're dealing with a patient who has suffered cardiac arrest? Is it important for you to know about that?
It is, in the sense that it informs the likelihood of survival.
And what do you mean by that, Dr. Langenfeld?
It's well known that any amount of time that a patient spends in cardiac arrest without immediate CPR markedly decreases the chance of a good outcome. Approximately 10 to 15% decrease in survival for every minute that CPR is not administered.
And doctor, was your leading theory then for the cause of Mr. Floyd's cardiac arrest oxygen deficiency?
That was one of the more likely possibilities. I felt that at the time, based on the information I had, it was more likely than the other possibilities.
And doctor, is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia is a commonly understood term.
Thank you, Dr. Langenfeld. No further questions.
Training is absolutely vitally essential to us as a department.
And officers are paid while they're being trained, is that correct?
Yes, they are.
And would it be fair to say that part of the objective of training is to impart Minneapolis Police departmental policies onto the officers so that they know what those policies are and are able to apply them?
Yes, it's important through training that we're reemphasizing not only our policies but really our values as a police department and what our community expects of us. It's to help our officers, and it's also to help our communities at the same time.
Does Minneapolis Police Department currently have a de-escalation policy?
We do.
And I guess, is it an either-or alternative? Is it like you either de-escalate or use force, and once you start using force, you just give up on de-escalation?
The goal is to resolve the situation as safely as possible. So you want to always have de-escalation layered into those actions of using force.
Do you recognize Exhibit 17 to be an image taken from the bystander video that you reviewed?
Yes, I do.
Now, sir, based upon your review of all of the information that you just mentioned, do you believe that the defendant followed departmental policy 5-304 regarding de-escalation?
I absolutely do not agree with that.
And how so?
That action is not de-escalation. And when we talk about the framework of our sanctity of life, and when we talk about the principles and values that we have, that action goes contrary to what we're taught.
As you reflect on Exhibit 17, I must ask you, is this a trained Minneapolis Police Department defensive tactics technique?
It is not.
Well, we read the departmental policy on neck restraints. Is this a neck restraint?
The conscious neck restraint by policy mentions light to moderate pressure. When I look at Exhibit 17, and when I look at the facial expression of Mr. Floyd, that does not appear in any way, shape, or form that is light to moderate pressure.
So is it your belief then that this particular form of restraint, if that's what we'll call it, in fact violates departmental policy?
I absolutely agree that violates our policy. Once Mr. Floyd had stopped resisting, and certainly once he was in distress and trying to verbalize that should have stopped. There's an initial reasonableness in trying to just get him under control in the first few seconds, but once there was no longer any resistance, and clearly when Mr. Floyd was no longer responsive and even motionless, to continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy. It is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
Not part of our ethics or our values. See what happens when you have a strong prosecution team. First of all, we need to give significant credit to Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, for what they have done thus far, how they have approached this particular case. That, of course, was the emergency physician, Dr. Bradford Langenfield, and Minneapolis Police Chief, Madaria Arredondo, testifying today. Long day of testimony taking place there. Let's talk about this with Bernarda Villalona, Senior Trial Counsel for the Joey Jackson Law Firm. This had to be, again, Bernarda, one of those good days for the prosecution to have that ER doctor just obliterate the defense team's notion that it was drug use that killed George Floyd.
Definitely. It was a definitely good day for the prosecution, because you got to think that the two main issues that the defense is going after in this case is, one, that George Floyd died as a result of a drug overdose, and that, two, that the use of force that Derek Chauvin actually used was one that is allowed by the department there in Minnesota. So today, both of those things came crackling down.
And so, again, the defense tried to push the ER doc as well as the police chief. Didn't go so well.
It definitely didn't work out in his favor. Especially the most telling thing and the most important thing that sticks out to me is that doctor said that for each minute that George Floyd went without any medical attention, that being CPR, there is a 10 to 15% chance that you are losing life. So that is what stood out more to me. But also more importantly is that George Floyd, unfortunately, was dead. He was in cardiac arrest from the moment that he was taken from the scene up until he was in the hospital. And it was just a technicality that a doctor had to pronounce him dead.
In terms of the police chief, this whole questioning of, oh, when was the last time you actually walked the streets? I mean, come on, really? It's the police chief.
Exactly. But here what you have is that the highest ranked police official in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, you have the highest ranked police official telling you that the practices that Derek Chauvin engaged in on that day where he put his knee on the neck of George Floyd was one that is not done by the police department. It is not one that is condoned by the police department. It was one that was excessive and hence deadly.
Where do you think they go in terms of where we go next with this trial? Because the prosecution is methodically walking this thing down, and so where do we go next?
Well, it's going to continue along this same type of testimony, Roland, because you got to think from the very beginning, from opening statements, the defense already told you that what they're disputing is the cause of death, as well as the training of Derek Chauvin. Remember, they try to paint a picture in their opening that, wow, Derek Chauvin, that he was distracted by this mob of people that included some juveniles with a love shirt on, and that he took his attention away from George Floyd because he was scared, he was threatened. So that is the line of questioning that they're going into. However, too bad for the defense that today you saw it. You had the highest ranking police official, as well as a training officer, the lieutenant, who has known Derek Chauvin for 20 years since he started the force, telling you, number one, this type of restraint is not used. Number two, this is deadly force. The force that he used is deadly. It is the last resort, especially is extreme and excessive when you're dealing with a man that is not being violent, a man that is not resisting, a man that is not armed, a man that is in a prone position, a man that is handcuffed, a man that is not a threat to you. And you use the highest level of force. And that highest level of force is what got you here. Those 9 minutes and 29 seconds of that deadly force that you put on the neck of George Floyd. And what does that equal out to? Murder.
All right, then. Bernardo, we surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Let's go to our panel here. Cleo Monago, your thoughts, how this is going thus far, as, of course, the defense is trying their best to put George Floyd on trial. The prosecution keeps coming back. No. It's you, Chauvin. It's you.
It doesn't look good for the defense, and the chief of police saying what he said seems to be nails in the coffin. But what I was thinking as I watched this, because of the previous conversation, is that the defense's logic that this was drug abuse and all the other things they're saying to kind of throw people off reminds me of what McConnell and Brian Kemp and these Republicans do. They are wrong and they're doing the wrong thing, and they do damage like Chauvin has, and they try to find these excuses to blame the people who they're victimizing for what they're doing. Like, again, with Kemp blaming the Stacey and Biden for the team leaving when it's them who did it. It's a powerful metaphor, and the death of George Floyd is a powerful metaphor too, and the knee on his neck, and that he was pleading for his life and they didn't care. And I think that people who are watching this show, Black folks particularly, need to understand that the people who are resisting logic and who are fighting against our ability to vote and live our lives in the hands of police are really a serious threat to us. And we need to stand up against it in every opportunity that we get. But it don't look good at all for the defense. And again, we'll see what occurs. I mean, do you know who the jury is yet?
Well, first of all, we don't know the names of the jury, but again, we do know a link of the jury. Teresa, your assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a full week of trying to understand 9 minutes and 29 seconds from the defense point of view. And I don't believe the public has even gotten to that point. I mean, honestly, the grief and the trauma of the witnesses that, their testimony of recording it and feeling like, they could have done more, they should have, stepped in. I mean, that has been really traumatizing for anybody who is there, knowing that, someone literally died right before your eyes and there's nothing you can do. But like I said before, I think the prosecution is doing a phenomenal job and ensuring that we are staying on track and staying on focus, because once we get off focus, we allow the defense narrative to pretty much take over this case, and which we can't, right? We can't let this be another Zimmerman case. We have to make sure that the George Floyd case is not only a learning experience and educational, but true justice actually reigns here in the U.S.
Michael.
We can all certainly watch these videos as we've done time and time again, and the new footage, which is just traumatic. I mean, it's just awful. And to a lot of us, this is, kind of easy, open, shut. The problem is, in our country, in our system of justice, it just takes one juror to find some reasonable doubt to say, you know what, he was in danger, he's a big guy, and all it takes is one juror. And that's what's so troubling about these cases, where to many of us, it seems so easy and so open and shut. The problem is, in our system of justice, it just takes one juror back in that room who could have come in saying, I'm never going to convict this white guy, this white police officer. I don't care what the evidence is. I don't care what the videos. I don't care how these jurors try to browbeat me. I am not going to convict. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we have jurors that are being objective, looking at the evidence. And keep in mind, too, over the last week, or however many days it's been for the prosecution to put on its case, and you're right, I agree with you, General Ellison should get a lot of credit along with the prosecutors. But during this last week, it's just been all the prosecution case. Yeah, we've heard some stuff in the media. Yeah, we've heard some of the cross-examination questions. But the defense puts on their case, too. And so we'll have to see what they come in with, though we don't, we certainly don't have to believe any of it, or it certainly doesn't matter. But just keep in mind, they have to get their shot, too.
Well, that is the case, and so we'll certainly be paying more attention to exactly what happens with the next phase of the trial. But again, we're now in week 2, and there's more. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends, go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. It's day 7 in the trial of ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Another member of the Minneapolis Police Department testified today that Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck was an unauthorized tactic. A Minneapolis training officer clarifies the MPD's crisis intervention approach. In hearing this morning without the jury present, the attorney for Floyd's friend, Maurice Hall, who was with Floyd the day he died, does not want her client to testify. Here's what took place in today's trial.
If we totally avoid the word drugs and just have Mr. Hall say, I was the passenger in the car, which is already clear. There's video and evidence, just for your knowledge, that Mr. Hall is in the passenger seat and is removed by the police. Beyond that, if that were established that he was the passenger when the police came up to the car, what was Mr. Floyd's condition immediately that he observed immediately before that? Would you agree that that's not incriminating if we keep all the mention of drugs or why or anything like that?
No, Your Honor, I do not agree that
How
that
would
is
that,
not.
when it did not incriminate the clerk who said he thought he was high, how would it be that Mr. Hall saying that would incriminate him?
Well, because first of all, Judge, the inquiry is not what evidence is in front of the jury. What testimony have they heard?
No, I'm just using that as an analogy on how that certainly didn't incriminate the store clerk by saying, well, he appeared high. Well, Mr. Hall saying, well, he appeared like he was falling asleep and it happened suddenly. Without anything else, seems to be a parallel type evidence. So I was using it as an analogy.
I understand, Judge, but the whole point here is to prevent Mr. Hall from incriminating himself. And him even answering that question that he was in the car puts him in very close proximity with Mr. Floyd, very close in time before he's alleged to have ingested drugs. And again, it exposes him on that third-degree murder charge. If there were to be a future third-degree murder charge, and Mr. Hall was charged with basically being involved in this drug activity that had caused Mr. Floyd to pass away due to an overdose, him even being in that car incriminates him in terms of behaviors of Mr. Floyd, what he observed when he observed it. So, no, Your Honor, I would argue that it definitely would expose him to potential incrimination.
And the observations of the officer in that situation, I think you described on direct examination, you described that an officer will also take into and apply to the critical decision-making model his or her own sensory perception.
Yes, sir.
So the touch of feeling a suspect be tense, right?
Yes, sir.
Or loose, right?
Yes, sir.
What they may hear comes into play.
Yes, sir.
So if they hear people threatening them or potentially threatening violence, that goes into that critical decision-making model as well, right?
Yes, sir.
And oftentimes, the scene of an arrested individual is very tense, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, defense counsel asked you if the officer should just focus on one small thing. And I would like you to make some sort of comment on differentiating between a small thing and a big thing. Because you would agree that something that is a big thing would probably be more important than a small thing, right?
It depends on what the big thing is and what the small thing is.
Well, for example, if we're looking at assessing somebody's medical condition, right, for the purpose of rendering emergency aid, would that be a big thing or a small thing?
That would be a big thing.
If then that is contrasted with, say, a 17-year-old filming you with a camera, would that be a big thing, the filming, or a small thing?
The filming would be a small thing.
If there was something like passive resistance, right, neither the conscious neck restraint nor the unconscious neck restraint would be authorized. Is that right?
Would not be authorized?
Would not be authorized.
That is correct.
And an unconscious neck restraint would not even be authorized for some forms of active resistance, would it?
That's correct.
And if the subject is offering no resistance, obviously, then no neck restraint would be authorized.
That's correct.
Or any restraint.
Or any...
Or any restraint, if there's no...
Yeah, generally, no.
Okay. In addition to the classroom training, you actually teach officers, show them physically how to do these sort of neck restraints?
Yes, sir.
At this time, I'd like to republish Exhibit 17. Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint? No, sir.
Is this a MPD authorized restraint technique?
Knee on the neck would be something that does happen in use of force that isn't unauthorized.
And under what circumstances would that be authorized? How long can you do that?
I don't know if there's a time frame. It would depend on the circumstances of the time.
Which would include what?
The type of resistance you're getting from the subject that you're putting the knee on.
And so if there was, say for example, the subject was under control, and handcuffed, would this be authorized?
I would say no.
Now, in terms of the continuation of use of force, and we're talking about involvement of onlookers, right? The words they use matter, correct?
Yes, sir, they do.
If they're cheering on and saying, "Good job, officer," that's one consideration, right?
Correct.
But if they're saying, "I'd slap the fuck out of you," or "You're a pussy," or "You're a chump," would that reasonably tend to rise alarm in a police officer?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions. And if they're saying, "Get off him, you're killing him," should the officer also take that into account and consider whether their actions need to be reassessed?
Potentially, sir, yes.
Nothing further.
Joining us now is trial attorney J. Wendell Gordon. J. Wendell, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered. First, give us a sense of your perspective of that testimony, having the training expert testify that the actions of Chauvin violated the department policy.
Well, you know, that's explosive testimony. And it's what a lot of us have been waiting for, to get to the experts. This case, I said from the very beginning, is going to be about the medicine, the physiology, and the experts. It's a beauty contest. And it's really a battle of the experts. So now we've introduced these experts into this situation. We can kind of figure out what the policies are, what the law is with regard to the behavior of Derek Chauvin. Now, what I see in this case coming from the defense is a lot of propaganda. I call it propaganda. Like first of all, they make it seem like they're the only people in the world who have to be concerned about crowds when they're doing their job. Nobody can call them a bum. Nobody can call them a bitch. I mean, what kind of profession when you're working with the public where you're not going to receive someone protesting something that you do? You should be a professional, like earlier witness had indicated, and do your job as you're supposed to do it. And if you was that much distracted, then you shouldn't have been on his back like that. You should have been concerned about what's happening behind you. So at the end of the day, I think what we've seen from the defense is a bunch of truth decay. I think that they have picked they created some issues, but I don't know that they've created reasonable doubt. They challenged some of the nuances of the case, but they haven't done enough, in my opinion, to create the doubt that they're looking for. Now, granted, they haven't had an opportunity to put on their case, and we should never judge an entire case by only half of the case. But the bottom line is, everything that they're doing is coming from the defense lawyers' playbooks. The 3 Ds is what I call it: deny, discredit, and destroy, and try to make it seem like we big black African-American men can walk through bullets and we have this superhuman strength, and that you have to, and we feel no pain, and that you have to just apply the most excessive and sadistic and draconian forces against us in order to gain control of us, to put us into custody. Now, here you have Mr. Floyd. He's down, and nobody even talks about this. This is an issue that I saw. He's right there by the tailpipe taking in gas fumes. He's got someone's knees on his neck, and he's got weights all over the bottom half of his body by these other officers. That is a terrible combination to try to breathe in, first of all, and then to have your breathing constricted by someone blocking blood flow to your brain. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. And it's in the middle of the May, so it's got to be hot. The ground has got to be hot. I mean, there are all kinds of factors that they didn't even consider, that I've considered. And I just feel like it's not going to be enough. But we as defense attorneys, and I do defense work, you have to work with what you have. And we're not magicians. We're just attorneys. So he's doing the best he can with what he has. But at the end of the day, I don't think that it's enough to tip the scale to show doubt. Now, you may have scored a few points, and points are good, so I'm not taking that away from him, but there needs to be a whole lot more work laid down before you've overcome before you've overcome reasonable doubt. Now, the prosecution doesn't have to prove their case beyond all doubt. It only has to be beyond reasonable doubt. And so I think they're still in the driver's seat.
Well, one of the things that is interesting, the line of questioning, if a cop is thrown off because somebody is cursing them out, you might not want to be a cop.
You might not want to do anything. You might just want to hide under a rock. I mean, they called him a bum. Like, how offensive is that? And plus, an officer's peace can never be breached. I mean, officers are trained to deal with people who are protesting their conduct, people who protest them, who call them names. You can't address each and everybody, every 17-year-old girl or 10-year-old with a camera phone or adult filming you while you're doing your job, as long as they are not interfering. And as much as they wanted to, they absolutely exercised great restraint, the type of restraint that Derek Chauvin should have exercised when he got by getting off of Mr. Floyd's neck. And because he didn't, he's sitting in trial facing these very heavy charges. And me personally, I hope he gets convicted.
Well, we will certainly see what happens next tomorrow. So we certainly appreciate it. Mr. Gordon, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, my panel today is D. Hawkins Hagler, former Georgia State Representative, Kelly Bethea, Communications Strategist, Mustafa Santiago Ali, PhD, former Senior Advisor for Environmental Justice, EPA. This is, again, I think what is very interesting and unique about what we are seeing unfold here, Mustafa, is just this very methodical march by the prosecutors. The fact that we've had so many police officers already testify for the prosecution speaks to something that we rarely see in these cases, where that blue wall cracking on behalf of one of their own.
Yeah, you know, they're just methodically making these steps toward justice, or at least we hope that it's justice. I've testified in a number of cases over the years, and to see the way that they've laid this out, you know, it's extremely professional, extremely well thought out. And yes, anything can happen on any given day by the time you get to the end of the trial, but I'm feeling very comfortable at this moment with how they've laid it out so far. You know, what we need is for the jury to actually believe what they've seen, for the jury to believe what they've heard when they're listening to the tapes and the testimony, and then to actually both, you know, come to a conclusion with both their hearts and their heads, because I think all of that is beginning to come together. Now, it'll be interesting to see when the other side presents its case. But, you know, everything that's been laid out so far has been very clear that Derek Chauvin is guilty of killing George Floyd.
Kelly.
I agree. I'm happy with how the trial is going so far, in that, like you said, there's definitely like a logic to how things are going. I am particularly excited regarding the experts coming forward now. Frankly, just in full transparency, it's easier for me to watch the experts without the videotape, because it is still very traumatic for me, and has been, to continuously watch the last moments of George Floyd's life on tape and on the news and the like. So to see the experts speak, they don't necessarily need the tape to describe exactly what happened, because they're experts, they're not eyewitnesses. So I am excited to see how they are going to more or less scientifically and based off of their subject matter, explain to the jury exactly why Chauvin is responsible for this man's death. I understand that the defense is coming up as far as presenting their case. My only concern is really just the threshold to convict somebody is beyond a reasonable doubt. This is not a situation in which the defense has to prove that Chauvin didn't do it outright. They just have to prove that he is not criminally responsible for George Floyd's death. And when you think about it, given the history of these cases and the history of police enacting violence on Black bodies, in the grand scheme of things, it feels like that threshold is very low. So I hope that the jury is actually really just paying attention and not just listening to the evidence, but also using their common sense, because the video shows exactly what happened. And no matter what the defense tries to do in putting the chink of armor, making the reasonable doubt, so to speak, hopefully they can overlook their excuses and actually convict this man.
D.
And I disagree with what everyone has said. I mean, they put together a methodical case. You cannot deny it. And to this day, honestly, I still have not watched the video because it's too traumatic for me. But I know that justice is going to prevail because you cannot help with the evidence that's been presented by the prosecution to come up with any other verdict than the one that they're going after.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. 28 witnesses have been called to the stand in the trial of ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. 8 of those were former or current officers who told the jurors Chauvin used excessive force and unauthorized force when he placed his knee on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. Today, the defense team played body cam footage. They claimed to hear Floyd say, "I ate too many drugs." The use of force expert from Los Angeles Sergeant Jody Steiger and Special Agent James Ryerson from Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension asked if they could make out what Floyd was saying in the recordings. Take a look at what happened today.
Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion was that no force should have been used once he was in that position.
In the scene of an arrest, even just in the immediate kind of wingspan, that can be very chaotic, right?
Yes.
People can be talking to each other. People can be talking over each other, right?
Yes.
The suspect may be saying some things, right?
Yes.
Bystanders may be saying some things, right?
Yes.
In the chaos, it's easy to miss some things, right?
In certain instances, yes, depending on the severity of what's going on.
I'd like to publish part of the body-worn camera. It's Officer King's body-worn camera starting at 2021-01.
This is a portion of what's already been received?
Yes.
Any objection?
No objection.
I'd like you to see if you can tell me what Mr. Floyd says in this instance. You hear what he said?
No, I couldn't make it out.
Does it sound like he says, "I ate too many drugs"? Listen again.
I can't make that out, no.
So in the chaos of a situation, things can be missed, right?
Yes.
Publish Exhibit 1007, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, "I ate too many drugs"?
Yes, it did. Agent Ryerson, while we were on a break, did you have an opportunity to review Exhibit 127, which is the composite with King's body-worn camera, correct?
Yes.
During that same time period.
Yes.
And prior to the short clip of Lane's body camera that you were shown as Exhibit 1007, is there a discussion about drug use by the officers in attempting to speak to Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And hearing that section of the audio, did that help you to understand what Mr. Floyd might have been saying that you were asked about by counsel?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, then we would ask to play 127, Exhibit 127, which is queued up to 2020-30 through 2021-01, where that phrase appears that Mr. Ryerson, Agent Ryerson, was asked about.
Please understand. No, please, I can't breathe. Get up on the sidewalk, please. One side or the other, please. My face getting up bad.
Here, should we get his legs up?
Oh, that's all right.
Nope, just leave him.
Just leave him.
Yep, just leave him.
All
right.
I'm dead.
The clerk's still sitting on the car there.
Look at my face, man.
I'm assuming so. I believe so. I found a pipe. He wouldn't get out of the car.
I ain't too much
Mercedes.
Please.
Yeah, across the street, Parks watching.
Please.
Two other people with
Please, I
him.
can't breathe.
So the record should reflect that we've played through 2021-10 with the quote that you were asked about appearing really at 2021-01, correct?
Yes.
And having heard it in context, are you able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there?
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, I ain't do no drugs.
So it's a little different than what you were asked about when you only saw a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, they try a little bit of everything here, Monique. Obviously, they want to put George Floyd on trial. That whole deal, can you make out, did he say, I ate the drugs? Dog, the ER doc has testified. They've already laid out how he died. Asphyxiation. Y'all can sit here and keep trying this whole deal. Just your assessment of what today.
We also know that there were drugs in his system, but that doesn't mean that they can then just try to get witnesses to guess and speculate about what a now dead man was saying, and everyone who listens to it could think something different about it. When I heard that part, though, frankly, I've questioned a number of times, and maybe Scott can help me on this, or Robert too. Where is the judge? I mean, who's running this courtroom, and does either side really know how to object? I mean, objection speculation, objection facts not in evidence. I'm lost because it's a little bit of a wild, wild west kind of anything goes thing. And granted, the defense sucks way more than the prosecution. They've been doing, for the most part, a good job, but just some fundamentals of evidence or something, because if your own witness, which is what happened yesterday, your own witness who testifies fine for you on direct goes out to pasture on cross-examination to the point that now they're calling her back as their witness, but that all happened absent objection. If your witness is talking too much, shut him down the way Roland shuts down Scott. That's what has to happen.
Ain't this some shit? Did you just plug me in?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
You just endorsed Roland?
Yeah, she did. Right, because she knows I'm the judge and the jury. So damn it, talk before I go to Robert.
And it's your show. It's your show.
Right, right there. You see that right there? See that right there?
Okay, let me.
It says Roland Martin. That goes above Unfiltered and Daily Digital Show. Go ahead.
One day that's going to say with a Scott Bolden.
Nah, no, it won't. I guarantee that won't happen.
No, what happened? Okay, let me give some legal foundation to a couple of thoughts, okay? Monique is absolutely right, and I've heard other legal analysts talk about these objections, okay? The defense put on a really sophisticated cross-examination. On cross, the defense attorney is testifying as opposed to the witness and trying to get yes, no answers, okay? Now, here, what he was trying to bring out was whether the words on that tape, the witness could make out, I ate too many drugs. The objection would have been to hearsay, right? However, because it's cross-examination, hearsay objections hardly ever work, because what the defense would say is, I'm not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted therein. I'm not offering it to say that it was true that he ate too many drugs. I'm offering it for the fact that he simply said it, not for the truth asserted therein, which is a big difference, and most judges would let that go. Because if I'm a defense attorney, I want the jury to hear that even the victim said he ate too many drugs. And then what's coming next are these witnesses who are experts and the pathologists, and you're going to be competing with these scientific theories, because in the end, only one thing matters in this case, and it's going to be a boring issue. But one thing matters is what substantially killed, because Minnesota's got this weird law where you don't have to show that the police brutality killed him, that it substantially contributed to it. All that matters is the jury is going to have to figure out with these competing pathologists and experts what killed George Floyd. Was it the drugs? Was it the police brutality? Was it a combination of both? And or what substantially contributed to his death? That's why the defense wanted to bring that out, because at closing, he wants to argue and make the victim his witness, along with any other points that he can bring out vis-a-vis. It really wasn't inappropriate to put his knee on his neck because he was trained to put his knee on his neck or his back, but it was closer to his neck and all these other issues. And so that's kind of the framework as to what's going on here in the courtroom.
Robert.
Well, to Scott's point, even if you don't believe that an objection is going to be successful, you still need to object just to break the cadence. You object just to make the judge have a ruling.
By the way, it's irrelevant too, by the way. It's all of this is irrelevant because the medical records and the autopsy that that my colleague just said before I started talking, Monique said. So it's really irrelevant, but it's an appearance and a messaging point for the defense. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
And you're completely right. And I think part of the problem for the prosecution right now is that in cases like this, the tie goes to the defense. The burden is on the prosecution. The prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to, and for the higher murder charges, they have to both show that Mr. Chauvin had the intent. He had to have a motive, not just simply that it was a workplace accident, which is the way that the defense is going to try to frame it. Mr. Chauvin was executing his job. He was doing what he was supposed to do. And tragically, Mr. Floyd was in such a decrepit and drug-riddled state that he accidentally died as a result of Mr. Chauvin's actions. Was his force excessive? Perhaps, but at most it's reckless, not criminal intent needed for a murder conviction. I don't think we've gotten anything from the prosecution thus far that goes to showing that it was the conscious object of Mr. Chauvin's to take the life of Mr. Floyd, not simply that it was a combination of events, including Mr. Floyd's health, the drugs which he had ingested, the stress of the situation, in addition to the need for to restrain him. And somebody on the internet is going to take this and say, I'm supporting the cops. No, I'm giving you a legal analysis of what we're looking at. Don't take this as a personal opinion. I'm giving you the legal analysis of what I've seen thus far. And just taking this from a completely state of equipoise, just coming in tabula rasa, just a blank slate. If you knew no other information except for what the prosecution has presented thus far, it'd be nearly impossible to come to a first-degree murder or even a second-degree murder conviction on this case. So I think the weight is on the prosecution to list some more weight.
But there is no first-degree murder charge. So they don't have to prove that it's his conscious objective to do it. That's not even on the table. We've got second degree, we've got third degree, and then we've got the second-degree manslaughter charge. And for none of those do they have to prove intent. But they certainly have, because when you have witness after witness saying that they were saying to the cops and were responded to that they could see that he was suffering, they could see that he couldn't breathe, they could see foam coming out of his mouth, and they took no action. When we have video where the officers were trying to get a pulse and didn't, when we have video showing that they had him in a prone position, handcuffed, and they know the training shows them that if you don't turn a suspect on the side as soon as possible, then it can cause what it did cause, which is death cardiac arrest due to asphyxia. So all of the elements are there and in place, but just to what Scott said about this objection, in my mind, if you're objecting because they're trying to get a dead man to testify, there are only a few reasons why you can do that, and they weren't hitting on any of them. It was hearsay, Scott, because either they're saying it for the truth. George Floyd is saying, I ate too many drugs because he ate too many drugs, which is what they're trying to prove because they're saying that he overdosed, or either they're offering it for what? His state of mind. He thinks he ate too many drugs. That's not relevant. That's not admissible. Are they saying it for the state of mind of the defendants, of the police officers? He's saying I ate too many drugs. Well, to me, that works for me if I'm the prosecutor. He's telling you that he's overdosing. You're not acting to save him. You can give him a drug that could save him right now if you believe that's true. If it's excited delirium, then take out those patches that you've been trained to use and treat the man. If you can't find a pulse, give him CPR. So they killed him from the point that they unnecessarily pointed a gun at him in the car to the point that they took him and tried to stick him inside the cruiser instead of working to diffuse the situation and de-escalate it because he was telling them verbally that he's claustrophobic and that he's hyperventilating. They can see the agitation. It was an utter and complete failing, and it was a criminal failure that led to somebody's death.
Okay, but that's a great closing argument, and I agree with you. But we're not at that junction yet. We really aren't.
That's not my close. I can give you a better close than that. I'm just
I know,
where we are.
But that's
this
but
is
you can argue
show.
that.
This just
you can argue that in closing, and the prosecution's going to argue. I would have objected anyway, right? But again, the fact that I'm offering it for the fact that he said it, as opposed to the truth of the matter asserted therein. On cross-examination, most judges over my several years of trying cases would let that go. But I would have objected anyway. So we'll see. We'll see.
Y'all done?
Roland, you can move on now. Why don't
you had lawyers on to talk about legal stuff. You know we.
No, I'm just making sure y'all ass is done.
Not really, but
yeah, okay, gotcha. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Stunning, shocking testimony today in the trial of ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. They focus on the cause of George Floyd's death. Prosecutors called a respiratory expert and a forensic toxicology expert to the stand to adjudicate George Floyd's demise. Folks, this is stunning what took place in the courtroom today. Watch this.
So we see here that he reaches a level of 0 of oxygen at 20, 25, 41. And so at that point, there's not an ounce of oxygen left in his body, in his entire body at 20, 25, 41.
And so was the knee then lifted off of his neck at the point there was no more oxygen in his body?
No, the knee remained on the neck for another 3 minutes and 2 seconds after we reached the point where there was not 1 ounce of oxygen left in the body.
Thank you, doctor. Have you formed an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to what the cause is or was for the low level of oxygen in Mr. Floyd?
Yes, I have.
Would you tell us what that is?
The cause of the low level of oxygen was shallow breathing. Small breaths, small tidal volumes, shallow breaths that weren't able to carry the air through his lungs down to the essential areas of the lungs that get oxygen into the blood and get rid of the carbon dioxide. That's the alveoli at the bottom of the lung. Officer Chauvin's knee is coming in, and that's compressing in against his side as well. So the ability to expand his left side here is enormously impaired. And also you're seeing that the size of the chain between the two, the right side and the left side, is very short. So his whole left arm is also being pulled over. And so it's preventing him also from expanding the right side. I've been focusing on the bucket handle and the pump handle on the left, but you can also see here that these are impaired, his ability to expand his chest. And of course, the key factor you must keep that isn't kind of in a sense seen here in one sense is the street. The street is what is having a huge effect because he's jammed down against the street. And so the street is playing a major role in preventing him from expanding his chest. As we discussed, you're seeing a more clear view here, how it's been really rammed into the back of his back. There's just no way he's going to be able to expand that. But with the left image, you see the finger on the street. Then over on the right image, you see his knuckle against the tire. And to most people, this doesn't look terribly significant, but to a physiologist, this is extraordinarily significant, because this tells you that he has used up his resources and he is now literally trying to breathe with his fingers and knuckles. Because when you begin to breathe with your rib cage and your diaphragm. The next thing you recruit after that is your sternomastoid muscle, which is the big muscle in your neck. And then when those are wasted up, then you're relying on these types of muscles, like your fingers, to try and stabilize your whole right side, because he's totally dependent on getting air into the right side. So he's using his fingers and his knuckles against the street to try and crank up the right side of his chest. This is his only way to try and get air to get into the right lung.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether a person who had none of those pre-existing health conditions, a healthy person, would have died under the same circumstances as Mr. Floyd?
Yes, a healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died as a result of what he was subjected to.
So Mr. Floyd's ratio is roughly just a little bit below the median ratio in DUI. So in postmortem cases, we know fentanyl concentrations can be much higher than norfentanyl concentrations because frequently these are deaths due to fentanyl. Other drugs may be present, and there could be other reasons for the death. It doesn't say that these are all fentanyl intoxications. But just looking at it as a whole, with a large amount of data, this is what we observed.
Joining us right now is attorney Ben Crump, of course, who represents the several family members of George Floyd's family. Ben, this was it was amazing to listen to what the doctor said, walking through this thing in a very methodical way. So that was first. But the second thing, Ben, is the prosecutors have been extremely deliberate how they're walking this thing down with the emotional testimony in week one, setting up the week with the officers, and then ending the week here with this particular doctor yesterday as well. Your assessment of how this has been going so far?
Well, I think it's extremely compelling what Keith Ellison and his team have been doing, and they have been very strategic, as you said, Roland Martin, doing the lay witness, the emotional witnesses at the very beginning of the trial, then talking about the use of force expert that I thought was most compelling, because you had the police chief and other police officers for the first time that we've seen in a profound way come out from behind the blue wall of silence and tell the truth, hopefully setting a new precedence in America. But today was really, I think, the nail in Derek Chauvin's defense, Roland, when you had these expert witnesses tell us so convincingly what was the cause of death that was consistent, Roland Martin, with what we saw the first time we saw that video where George Floyd was tortured for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. They corroborated what we saw in the video with the medical science. And so I think for any juror sitting there, it is more than enough evidence to hold Derek Chauvin criminally liable for killing George Floyd.
I think when you begin to examine, again, this very methodical nature, we've watched the defense really be cornered and trapped, if you will, by having actual police officers, even on the force, testify against Derek Chauvin.
Yeah, and it was riveting to us, and I don't know why it still is riveting. That's what police should do in every case, but we never see it. Roland, you covered Laquan McDonald's case a lot as well, where the young brother was shot 16 times in the back. And even in that case, the police chief and the department still said that it was a justified shooting and killing of that young black man. So this is really a powerful and unusual testimony that we saw happen in the Derek Chauvin trial regarding the death of George Floyd. And just to hear that black police chief really go and so matter-of-factly say that this was absolutely unnecessary, what Derek Chauvin did was just powerful testimony.
The obviously the defense has now had an opportunity to present their case. This is all on the prosecution right now. But just your assessment of how this has gone thus far in terms of how they have presented and laid this case out. How is the Floyd family feeling about what they're seeing and hearing each day in these last 9 days?
Yeah, and Roland, they're praying a lot. You have met this family. They're from your home state, and they are cautiously optimistic. I know Attorney Monique Presley, and I talked to them some today about why we feel that the state is doing a good job. And we know we've been doing this long enough, Roland Martin, to know we can't take a conviction for granted. But this is the best prosecution of a police officer charged with killing a black person in America that I have seen in my professional career. So I'm very grateful to Attorney Keith Ellison, the first black attorney general in the state of Minnesota, who's a Democrat. And when you compare that to Breonna Taylor, Daniel Cameron, this black attorney general who's a Republican, and how he did everything in his power to exonerate the police, it goes to show you that black voters matter and elections have consequences.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Folks, let's go to the Derek Chauvin trial. Determining George Floyd's cause of death remained the focus today in the trial of the ex-Minneapolis police officer. A forensic pathologist and the chief medical examiner who performed Floyd's autopsy delivered riveting testimonies. This is what they had to say.
So, Dr. Baker, take into account the entire exchange you had with Mr. Nelson on Mr. Floyd's medical conditions, on whatever testimony you gave, wherever you gave it. I want to bring our attention back to what's reflected in Exhibit 193. And taking all of that into account, what today remains your opinion as to the cause of death for Mr. Floyd?
So my opinion remains unchanged. It's what I put on the death certificate last June. That's cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual restraint and neck compression. That was my top line then. It would stay my top line now.
And so if we look at the other contributing conditions, those other contributing conditions are not conditions that you consider direct causes. Is that true?
They are not direct causes of Mr. Floyd's death. That's true. They're contributing causes.
And in terms of manner of death, you found then, and do you stand by today, that the manner of death for Mr. Floyd was, as you would call it, homicide?
Yes, I would still classify it as a homicide today.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. No further questions. So Dr. Baker, we did find from the toxicology amounts of fentanyl and methamphetamine in the results from the lab.
That is correct.
You didn't mention either fentanyl or meth in Mr. Floyd's system. You mentioned those, but you don't list either of them on the top line as causes of death. Why is that?
Well, the top line of the cause of death is really what you think is the most important thing that precipitated the death. Other things that you think played a role in the death but were not direct causes get relegated to what's known as the other significant conditions part of the death certificate. So the other significant conditions are things that played a role in the death but didn't directly cause the death. So, for example, Mr. Floyd's use of fentanyl did not cause the subdual or neck restraint. His heart disease did not cause the subdual or the neck restraint.
All right. So these are items that may have contributed but weren't the direct cause.
Correct. In Mr. Floyd's specific case, the fact that he had been COVID positive 7 or 8 weeks before he passed away did not factor into my cause of death determination because I didn't see any signs of COVID at his autopsy, and his lungs did not have any of the stigmata of COVID that I would expect to see under the microscope. And sure enough, that came back with the exact number that would be consistent with Mr. Floyd having sickle cell trait. So it's really just a fluke that it got picked up at autopsy. In my opinion, it doesn't have anything to do with why he died.
All right. So if you put all this together, cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression, what does that mean?
Well, what it means to me is that the activities of the law enforcement officers resulted in Mr. Floyd's death, and that specifically those activities were the subdual, the restraint, and the neck compression.
And does this then also represent your own conclusion?
Yes.
A conclusion you have reached and an opinion you hold to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Was the methamphetamine significant in your assessment of the cause of death?
No.
So then, based on your review of the video and application of your work experience and knowledge, did you rule out drug overdose as a cause of death?
Yes.
And that's an opinion you hold to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
So if the manner of death here has been determined to be homicide, does that, in your opinion as a medical examiner, rule out a death by accidental drug overdose?
Yes.
Rob, I've talked about all week, really the last couple of weeks, how the prosecutors, how they have moved through this. They really haven't run away from the issue of drugs in George Floyd, and really blunting the efforts of the defense to make that the cause. It's going to be a little hard to try to, I believe, to convince this jury that that medical examiner is out of his mind when he said, nope, nothing changes my opinion. This was homicide.
Yeah, I would hope so. I can say 20 years ago, almost to the day from yesterday, Cincinnati, we had an officer shoot and kill an unarmed African-American man, Timothy Thomas. Then I was a student listening to DMX. I was head of the student chapter of the NAACP, and then I was actually in the middle of election to become student body president. But obviously there were demonstrations, and there were some riots, and there was just all out, just chaos. And the city of Cincinnati shut down for 4 days, and there was a curfew, and all the things you see happening right now before social media has been happening for a very long time. Happened when I was a student, happened before I was a student, and now we are seeing this play out once again. And I will say what the prosecution is hoping is going to work is what worked in the Timothy Thomas's murder trial. It's what worked in Samuel DuBose when I became chairman of the board. An officer shot someone and killed an unarmed African-American man. And their goal is they know it's not reasonable. Their goal is to try to get into the mind of one juror, if they can, and get this to be a hung jury to say, and figure out a way to dehumanize him or to say he's the reason he died. That has worked before. We know it's a playbook that has worked very well. I will say that how the prosecution has litigated the case is some of the best I have seen in any of these cases. They did what you just said. They definitely addressed the issue just front of the matter to make sure that they didn't allow that force to be used. Next, they also did a good job of humanizing George Floyd, not as somebody that was a drug addict or somebody that, was a criminal, but someone that was a human, that was a volunteer. And that happened to, just like we just talked about with DMX, he happened to have an issue with drug addiction, just like many black and a whole lot of white Americans have issues with. And so they did a really good job of humanizing him and not allowing the defense to paint this narrative that the reason why George Floyd is dead is because something George Floyd did. No, it's because this officer stood on his neck for 9 minutes in the discussion.
Anna?
Well, first and foremost, I agree with my co-panelist. Anybody who has eyes and has watched the video, you will see that it was straight up homicide, right? But defense, they have to play their part, right? You're paid to do a job that is to defend your client to the best of your ability, right? So trying to smear and trying to make George Floyd to appear to be this less than perfect citizen or this person who is the cause of his own death is nothing new in the playbook. It is something that prosecution, defense use all the time when they're trying to win a case. You ruin the credibility of the person, and that way it's easier for you to win your case. But here we must remember that it is not George Floyd that is on trial. It is not him. He is someone that was murdered. And when I look at this issue from a global perspective, what I can tell you is that the United States, as the leading country when it comes to human rights, cannot continue to police the human rights activities of other nations if we are violating the rights of our own citizens each and every day, especially the rights of our Black and brown and poor people in this country. So I know with Secretary Blinken, after he was sworn in, he vowed to the international community that he was going to focus on human rights. He was going to ensure that countries do not violate the rights of others or their citizens. But we have to start at home. We have to be the role model. We have to show the rest of the world how this is supposed to be done. Because the reality is that, Roland, The world is watching this trial. I mean, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, they are watching this step by step. And I've been on television all across the continent giving my own analysis of this trial. And they're paying attention. And the outcome of this trial will impact America's standing.
Michael Imhotep.
Well, Roland, I've been watching every day of the trial. I've been talking about it every night on my show. I'm on 6 nights a week. And there's been very damaging testimony, especially that's come out today and yesterday, Thursday, from the experts, from Dr. Martin Tobin, from the heart surgeon, Dr. Bill Smock, and then today from the medical examiner, Dr. Andrew Baker, and then also from Dr. Thomas. And what the prosecution has been doing is systematically going through step by step by step, based upon facts and evidence with expert witnesses, dismantling and disarming the defense of their argument, whether it's heart disease, whether it's the drugs, whether it's excited delirium. And excited delirium is rooted in racism. On day 9 of the testimony, Dr. Bill Smock shut down the excited delirium argument as well. Okay, so it's masterful what the prosecution has done, but I caution people, as I've been cautioning my listeners, the defense has not presented their case yet. Once the prosecution rests, then the defense will bring forth their witnesses. The defense will bring forth their case. Yes, Eric Nelson has done cross-examination, but the defense has not presented their case yet. So even though this is damaging, and hopefully Chauvin is found guilty, because we all know he's guilty, but as Rob was saying, it's extremely important for people to understand the burden of proof is on the prosecution. The prosecution has to prove, depending upon which charge that you're trying to get a conviction on or whatever, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors. It has to be unanimous based upon the evidence, not based upon feelings and emotions. If there's one juror who has doubt, and Nelson is consistently trying to plant the seeds of doubt in at least one juror. If you can get one juror to say, well, I'm not sure, then you have a mistrial, okay? Yep. And it's up to the prosecution to try Chauvin again. So once again, we have to pay attention to this. But lastly, I will say this is a good opportunity for especially African Americans to study law and to understand these whole legal proceedings and things like this, because unfortunately, the two things we don't understand, one is history, the other is law.
Yeah, I will say, like, one other point on this. When you look at, if this case was not an officer, this will be clear as day. Someone sitting on someone's neck for 9 minutes and they died. But the fact that it's so hard for us to convict an officer is the challenge within this case, because officers are allowed to get away with anything, and they're assumed to have the benefit of the doubt. And so, to Michael's point, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's even a higher standard when it comes to officers. You have to prove beyond any doubt. Like, that's not even the actual legal standard, but the actual standard and how it is applied. When a police officer kills a black person, it's almost beyond any doubt, not even reasonable doubt. And we have to change that perception. So, and the defense knows that. So they're going to go time and time and again just to figure out, is there any way we can just create a little bit of doubt? Because that's all I need to do. Right. All I need to do is say, well, oh, it was just a little bit of excessive force. He didn't know that was going to happen. Or the officer was just so concerned about the crowd. Somebody might believe that because they have some racist beliefs, or they don't know they have racist beliefs, and they're speaking to that one or two people, because I think the majority of the jury are going to find guilt in some way. But it's going to be very challenging to find a unanimous verdict. I think this is clear as day. I think it should be. I think we haven't seen many clearer cases than this, but that doesn't mean it's guaranteed, just given the history of America when it comes to convicting officers.
Right. All right. Okay. Go ahead. Final comment.
That's why it's important to have legislation to address the qualified immunity, because we know oftentimes officers get to walk away because of this protection, and that is the highest protection that one can have. While I do understand that officers are put in positions where they have to make an instant decision as to, am I going to die or is someone else going to die, right? and they have to decide quick. And sometimes they're in situations where if they don't act, they will die, and other people will also die. But at the very same time, it needs to be done in a manner where people don't have this implicit bias, because the reason why it's easier for you to pull that trigger on a black man versus a white man is because the notion of fear. Is this person, do I find this person threatening to me, right? And if the answer is yes, because of your implicit biases, you are more than likely to pull that trigger, or in the case of George Floyd, straight up murder the guy, right? So the qualified immunity needs to be addressed through federal legislation, and two, there needs to be even more work done in the area of implicit biases and so forth.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends, go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.